Uh, thank you. And David, if you're ready to go, I need to read a little opening statement for the record and we can get right to things, okay? Okay, this is Ray Eberling from the University of Florida's Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, and today is August 5th, 2020. I'll be talking to David Flagg from Gainesville, Florida, as part of both of the University of Florida's digital collections and the Library of Congress's American Folk Life Center's Veterans History Project. And could you give me your full formal name, please?
Norman David Flagg.
Okay, so let's get right into your early life, starting from the beginning. Where and when were you born?
Alachua General Hospital here in Gainesville, 1937.
Mm-hmm.
My father was on the staff at the University of Florida, is how he came to move to Gainesville, or come to Gainesville, and then I was born here a couple of years after they relocated.
Mm-hmm.
And
could you give me your exact birthday, if you don't mind?
July 28th.
July 28th.
Just turned 83.
Congratulations. And then I take it you grew up in Gainesville?
I grew up in Gainesville. Some said never grew up. But I went to elementary school here. This is after World War II was over.
Uh-huh.
We returned to Gainesville, my mother and sister, myself, and then later my father when he was off of active duty.
Mm-hmm.
GHS, Gainesville High School.
Mm-hmm.
Participated in athletics and down home boys, hairy-legged boys, they say. And then University of Florida. My father died of a rather early age of 43 from a heart attack.
Wow.
Between my junior and senior year in high school.
Yeah.
So things were a little ragged around there. And since I was also enrolled in ROTC, Army ROTC, I pursued that along with a bachelor's degree from UF.
Okay.
Then I went on active duty.
Let me backtrack for just a moment, okay? Let's
Sure.
talk a little more about your early life, if we could. I know you were born in Gainesville. You said your family had to move for a few years, and pretty much when you were a toddler, I guess, because of the war.
Yeah.
Where did you go?
Well, my dad, once Pearl Harbor happened,
Mm-hmm.
my dad said, well, I've got to activate my commission. He had a reserve officer's commission from Clemson University. And so he requested to be placed on called to active duty. And his first assignment was in Atlanta at 3rd Army headquarters. And then he was put in charge of reception center activity, as they called it. He was a little old for basic infantry, but it worked out well. He didn't have to go overseas, but he fulfilled a useful and needed service of screening and processing recruits into active duty, then taking them on a troop train to their basic training camp, dumping them off there and going back and pick up another load. And then in reverse, after the war was over, he did the same thing in reverse, processed soldiers out of active duty back into civilian life.
Okay. So that was pretty much in the Atlanta area you stayed during the war, your family?
And there was a little bit of time in Arkansas and Louisiana.
Okay. Now, you said your father had worked at the University of Florida. What was his job here?
He was an associate professor in the College of Agriculture, which at that time did a lot of agronomy mapping.
Mm-hmm.
Also did survey, and created soil maps in particular. And I think some of those maps are still there at the UF library.
So he went back into active duty, you say, as a lieutenant colonel. Had he been in World War I?
No,
or a little after that?
Active duty as a second lieutenant, and then first, and then captain and major. He remained in the active reserves after the war. That's how he got promoted with his reserve commission to lieutenant colonel at the time of his death.
Did your mother work outside the home, or was she a housewife?
Yeah, she worked on the university campus in the library.
Oh, okay.
And my sister and I were doing the best we could to get along. It was pretty ragged times.
Yeah, you had mentioned briefly, or I think maybe your wife mentioned that you have some family history going back in Florida quite a ways. Could you elaborate that on a little? Or
Well, my grandparents and great-grandparents on the Flagg side of the family moved to Lake Wales, Florida from Missouri. And that was in 1916 to Lake Wales. And then my mother's side of the family, the last name of which is Cain, C-A-I-N, my mother's family moved to Lake Wales a couple of years after that, independent of one another. They didn't know each other until they met in Lake Wales, where my father and my mother graduated from high school, met and got married after Dad finished his degree at Clemson.
okay,
As far as,
go ahead. Yes, you'll have to forgive me. Sometimes there's a little lag in this transmission, so I'm not trying to interrupt you.
I was going to say that my great-grandmother, Hattie, Hattie, Hattie Flagg, Hattie, what was it, Gordon? Hattie Gordon.
Norman.
Or Norman, I forget which. But anyway, she apparently, I can't document this yet, was the first postmistress in Florida, and appointed by Calvin Coolidge and Wilson and Hoover. She was a Republican placed in a Democratic, Southern Democrat environment there in Lake Wales. Fortunately, she was a very industrious and entrepreneur person. She had worked for the post office in Missouri before they moved. She obviously continued to have contacts, political contacts. They got her appointed to the postmistress and kept her there for quite a while. So she was able, and indeed underwrote the costs of my father and his cousin, my great-grandmother's other grandson, for going to college. And I remember my father paid her back, and I remember him counting it out in cash in Gainesville. And we drove down to Lake Wales, and he presented his money. She didn't charge interest. Gave her the money, and when she died, she left it back to him. And the other cousin, the other grandson, the caveats, by the way, were the great-grandmother said, I'm going to pay for your college, but you got to promise you won't smoke before 21 or drink before 21. Well, he died an alcoholic. He didn't pay the money back, nor did he keep up with the caveats.
Now, you mentioned a sister. Did you have any other siblings?
I have a sister now deceased who was also here in Gainesville.
Did you know of any other aunts or uncles, or probably uncles at this point in history, that also served in the military?
Well, we can go all the way back to the Battle of the Lamprey River in Massachusetts. And Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Flagg was a colonial officer, and he was killed by Indians up there in Massachusetts at the time. And then on down through the April 17th, 1775, the night that Revere and Sam Proctor, not Sam Proctor, but Cedric Pearson and Billy Dawes took off across country to say that the regulars are coming. And there were a lot of people besides Paul Revere that were riding, raising the alarm. But Longfellow found, listen, my children, you shall hear the midnight ride of Paul Revere, but it rhymed. So he got all the publicity. Yeah, that's a little side. There was flags living all around there at that time. And the other, two of them, I guess, were bell ringers in the Old North Church.
Wow.
From which the lanterns were lifted.
Amazing.
And,
Let's get back to the end of World War II. Your family comes home. I'm guessing both your parents got their jobs back at the university? Did
yes.
they?
Well,
And by now,
my mother ceased working,
oh, okay.
and my dad was back at the university, yes, until
Okay.
his death in 1954.
Let's do a little Gainesville history if we could here just for a moment. I realize you're maybe 9, 10 years old at the most. Back when the University of Florida, suddenly it has become co-ed.
Yeah.
And during the war, I think the enrollment had gone down to below 1,000 at one point. And suddenly you have the massive influx of GIs and their families all over the country, but specifically here to Gainesville, and those Flavet buildings were being built. Are you old enough to remember any of that?
Yes. Yes, I do remember that. And a big wave of GIs coming in, the great GI Bill that helped them all get through college and make up for lost time. And I remember those Flavet buildings, which were old barracks from Fort Bragg near Stark.
I'm glad you mentioned what they were, because you and I know what Flavets were, but not everybody else who's listening to this may know that. They were still here in the late 1960s, that much I know, and still being used.
I thought it was ironic. My dad's position at the university was within the College of Architecture. And their offices were in these Flavet buildings. Knocked down buildings. Excuse me. So here was the architectural experts and talented mechanical drawers and so forth. They had to be in one of the oldest broken down buildings on the campus.
Again, going back, you mentioned the elementary and high schools you went to. Could you review that for us again, where you attended and what activities were you interested in when you're attending school here in Gainesville?
When we moved back to Gainesville after War II, I was in the 3rd grade.
Okay.
And Sidney Lanier was in public elementary school. That's where I went to elementary school. Also then a year at J.J. Finley Elementary, and then to GHS, which at that time was the 7th through 12th grades. So you had a middle school there, but it wasn't defined as such.
Yes.
And it was in the old GHS building was red brick downtown on University Avenue, basically across from 706 restaurant now.
I remember that building, yes.
And I worked a lot in summers, had a real good job as a substitute mail carrier at times, which helped with the finances. And I was able to squeeze football practice in there too. And played varsity in the 10th, 11th, and 12th grades, and worked outside classroom. I was going to almost went out for baseball because I liked that a lot, but I just didn't have time for that in football. Also squeezed a year of the band in there in the 7th grade.
What did you play?
B flat alto.
Okay. Alto sax.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, when you turned 17, you mentioned your father's untimely death. Had you already graduated from high school and getting ready to go to university when you decided to join the Army Reserve at that point?
It was probably a emotionally impulsive thing to kind of honor my father in the sense that he served in the military and felt good about that. And so when he died in August of ~54, he was playing golf, by the way, with Clark Butler and Dr. Snow. And he died on what's now the University Golf Course, at that time, country club. And let's see, where were we?
Oh, that's fine. We were getting, when you graduated from high
yeah,
school, it had briefly gone into the reserves, but had you already known that you were going to be an ROTC at the University of Florida?
No, I hadn't thought that far ahead.
You're still in high school.
I was still in high school. I had my senior year to complete. And once I completed that,
Uh-huh.
enrolled at the university. And at that time, the curriculum of the public universities in Florida required you to take ROTC your freshman and sophomore years.
Right. I recall that.
And so I knew I got into that and enjoyed it for the most part and understood you could get a stipend if you got into upper division ROTC,
Mm-hmm.
like that idea, and then be commissioned a second lieutenant. So,
I'm trying to remember if during your period at the University of Florida, if the Air Force ROTC was around at that time, or was it just Army?
Army and I overlapped the time they came in.
Oh, okay.
Air
Okay.
Force ROTC was about 1958.
And I was wondering what year that was, because I know the Navy didn't come on till I think the 1970s sometime.
That's right.
But so the Army was kind of the default service you decided on, because
That's
largely because of your father's background, and it was the ROTC available at the time, or
Yeah, that's exactly right. The Army dominated the service awareness.
Mhm.
And so I was a regimental major in ROTC.
Mhm.
When I graduated from the Journalism and Communications College, I had about 2.5 months before I was to report to active duty from my commissioning. So I worked at Florida Bookstore and whatever I could find. And then went on active duty to Fort Harrison, Indiana, for the Adjutant General's Corps training, which is, you probably well know, the Adjutant General's Corps is kind of like the sit-in for the commanding general or commanding officer
Mhm.
in handling classified material and other administrative responsibilities.
Now, your major at the university, it was in the College of Journalism, but was it journalism per se? Was it broadcasting? Was it public relations? Or I know they had several majors there at the time. I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Advertising specifically.
Oh, okay. And because I also know, I think Fort Benjamin Harrison was where the Army's journalism training was.
I didn't.
But you didn't take part in that?
No, I didn't. I wasn't aware of that.
Oh, okay. Maybe that's in later years.
Well, when I finished the time there at Fort Harrison, I then went to Fort Bragg and right into jump school to get my parachute wings. I found out, hey, I'm going to volunteer for this because that's the only way you get into it. But you get paid as an officer, you get paid an extra $110 a month, hazardous duty pay.
Okay, so that was something you had heard about and you volunteered for. That was not something they surprised you with. It says, congratulations, you're going to jump school.
No, I volunteered for it. And
Okay.
they didn't hesitate to assign me because there weren't many Adjutant General Corps officers that were airborne qualified.
I see. So tell me a bit about the about airborne training at Fort Bragg. Was that held at Fort Bragg at that time, or was it at Fort Benning? Or
it was at Benning, it still is, but at the same time, Fort Bragg had its jump school for the 82nd, exclusively, that started up during World War II. But they closed that down a little after I was, it would have been about 1964 or 5. The Fort Bragg jump school closed and everything was consolidated at Fort Benning.
Did you like jumping?
It was a thrill. Yeah, get your adrenaline going, and you're so well trained and trusted and had confidence in your equipment and personnel, training personnel, that really didn't think that much about it being hazardous. But
and how long was that training? Do you recall?
4 weeks.
Only 4 weeks, and then they put you into an operational unit from there?
Yes, then assigned to the command section of the 82nd Airborne Division.
Okay. Would you happen to remember this far back how subordinate to the 82nd Airborne, there must have been a brigade or a company level organization you belong to?
Command,
Do you recall that?
Command and Control Battalion.
Command and Control Battalion. Okay.
Within that, I was assigned to the command section.
Okay.
And that was General Conway, who was the commanding general, 2 stars. And he retired at 4 stars. So I had quite a good experience getting to know him.
And I'm trying to think date-wise, we're now into 1959, going into 1960 approximately, or when you had finished your training and got assigned to a unit?
You mean after jump school?
Yeah.
Well, I was after jump school, I was in the command section.
What I mean is the year, was that?
60, 61, somewhere in there.
Okay, all right.
Then the Berlin Wall was about to be built, and we were put on alert. And I was back and forth in being assigned to the 82nd with responsibility of top secret documents, and also over at 18th Airborne Corps, which, as you know, the 101st Airborne and the 82nd Airborne constituted the 18th Airborne Corps. General Hamilton Howes was the commanding general of that type of corps. So anyway, I was back and forth between the 2 airborne command offices, and then it came time for me to leave active duty, and so I departed after two and a half, almost 3 years.
Let's go back to what was going on. This was the height of the Cold War, as they say.
Yep.
There were no active wars, but you had already mentioned the Berlin Wall, and I believe there was at least one other hotspot during that time, and that was the Bay of Pigs invasion. Were you being trained for specific operations at for either of those instances?
Yes, the Berlin Wall thing was, as our president loves to say, it is what it is, and that's a joke, right?
Right, got it.
Or an attempt at one.
Yeah, anytime you need a water or to break, or let me know.
Okay.
I'll take one myself. Okay,
Yeah,
so go ahead.
As a first lieutenant,
Mm-hmm.
I was involved in security measures while the responsibilities of planning for the Bay of Pigs fell to the 18th Airborne Corps and then some naval admirals and some Marines. And the room, I guess is what I'm trying to say, the room in which this planning was done required, as you might imagine, very sensitive top secret documents and contingency plans.
Mm-hmm.
Because if Kennedy had given the word to go, it would have been over pretty quickly, considering the planning that was done and the readiness that were available. So, yes, I was involved in the planning in the sense I didn't do any of the planning, but I observed the security measures to make sure the planning documents were always secure and that the right people got in to the right door.
So you would not have been the one necessarily, or one of the people necessarily, to actually jump out of the plane?
I would have probably gone in the second wave with the general, yes.
Okay, all right.
Probably not the first wave.
All right. And then...
but we were down at Homestead Air Force Base as a trial scramble. And we were at shoots and live ammo. And South Florida about sank the military equipment that would move down there.
So you were ready to go if called upon.
Exactly.
Was there any buzz amongst the troops that you can recall when that all fell apart?
Well, they were disappointed for the most part. They thought they were going to get a combat jump. And they didn't like that Kennedy kind of left them high and dry, the Cuban freedom fighter.
uh, you said you got out of the service in 1962. Was that before or after the Cuban Missile Crisis, which happened in October of 62?
I left just as that was being fulfilled.
Okay. So,
Almost
go ahead.
told I was just about called back from civilian life after just leaving. And it was that close, but they didn't need me, so I didn't go back for the literal Bay of Pigs invasion, which never happened.
Right. So you had done a 3-year commitment. Was that it? And you decided not to make the military a career?
That's right. Yeah, I enjoyed the military, and it was good training, if you will, for self-discipline to somewhat. I can always use that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was with General Conway once as a supernumerary aide de camp, and he said, "Well, Flagg, what are you going to do? You're about to get separated from active duty. What are you going to do?" And I told him I had a couple things lined up. He said, "Well, if you want to get an RA commission, regular Army commission, I'll endorse your application." Well, as you know, Ray, you have a commanding general of the 82nd Airborne in your corner, you're going to be able to get what you want from the Pentagon.
Mm-hmm.
So I thanked him for his graciousness and generosity, but that closed that door.
Mm-hmm. What month did you actually get out then in 1962? Do you recall?
I think it was April.
Okay. Did you come straight back to Gainesville?
Yes.
Were you already married at that point, or?
I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Oh, that's fine.
When I separated from active duty at Bragg, I moved to Charlotte.
Oh, okay.
Charlotte, where I worked in marketing for the Pepsi Cola company.
Oh.
Not the franchise, but the headquarters in New York.
Mm-hmm.
Charlotte was a regional office.
Mm-hmm.
I was there for a year, didn't like it, and was great, easily transitioned to DuPont Company in their textile fibers division. And again, coordinating between the marketing people in New York and the salespeople that worked out of the regional office and called on the various textile mills and so forth, promoting DuPont fibers, synthetic fibers.
Okay. Yeah, this was pretty early, I think, in the era of synthetics, wasn't it?
Oh yeah,
Textiles.
Dacron, Orlon, Lycra.
Right.
Trilo nylon. Yeah. An interesting little story, if I could sidebar.
Sure, go ahead.
Wallace Carruthers was a chemist who came up with what had not existed before, a long chain polymer. And he said, "I'm not sure what the end use of this is going to be, but Eureka, I have found it." So all the chemists said, "Here's 100% synthetic that can be pulled and lengthened and lengthened and lengthened into a long chain polymer." Well, that became fiber. That became a thread to make clothes. Wallace Carruthers was just, DuPont did it that way for their chemists. They just give them a laboratory and say, "You just go in there and create." Wallace Carruthers did just that. He said, "Okay, here's nylon, here's something." And then the powers that be named it nylon, which is a synthetic name in itself. And Wallace Carruthers committed suicide.
Mm.
He couldn't create fast enough to suit his thinking.
Amazing.
So the inventor of nylon and synthetic fibers, Wallace Carruthers, was a suicide victim of his success.
Amazing story. So how long did you last with DuPont?
2.5 years.
How many again?
2.5.
Okay.
And I was in Charlotte, and then I got transferred to New York, to the New York office. I didn't like that at all. New York was just a little too much. The novelty wears off quickly.
You're talking New York City, I take it.
Yes, Manhattan.
Okay.
And,
Go ahead.
Then I left and went to Gainesville.
So you came back to Gainesville. What? So that was mid '60s by then. About what year was that?
66, 67, all in there.
Okay. Were you married by then, if I may ask, or?
Not yet.
Okay.
That's where I met my wife in Tallahassee.
Ah.
That's where I was hired as assistant executive director for the Florida Forestry Association, which is timber and wood products lobbying.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I came to it in Tallahassee, where the capital is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, and that's where I met with my wife, Christina.
Okay. So you did return to Gainesville. What did you do professionally here then, starting with the mid '60s?
Well, let's see. Well, I went from the Florida Development Commission and the Forestry Association, and was hired as public relations director for the Florida Council of 100, which I met a lot of good contacts there. And then I had, as you can tell, and I'm not finished yet, an eclectic background.
I can see that. And I'm quite familiar with the Florida Development Commission and the Council of 100.
Are you?
Which I believe was sort of I think it was a Bud Dickinson idea, but Ferris Bryant implemented it.
That's right.
As I recall.
Scott Linder was the chairman when I was on their staff.
Yes. So when you returned to Gainesville, what did you do for a living?
I bought into a little company called Bob White Productions.
Oh, could you say the name again?
Bob White Productions.
Oh, okay.
It was an entrepreneurial kind of thing, and with small. It mainly was radio oriented, and my function mainly was to try to get some more comprehensive resources for public relations, or businesses or nonprofits. And let's see.
You skipped the guidance center.
Yeah, that's
okay.
Right. Yeah, it went from Chris and I moved from Tampa, where the Council 100 was then located.
Yes.
And went with a private nonprofit community mental health center as community relations director, raising money and raising awareness of the services.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, outpatient services of the guidance center, which was quite a departure from what I had been doing previously.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a good experience. And our first son was born there in Daytona, Halifax.
So when did you eventually return to Gainesville for good? If you did return to Gainesville for good?
From Longwood.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I was with helping a development called The Springs in Altamont Springs.
Mm-hmm.
And the offer came along about getting involved with Bob White Productions, and we moved back to Gainesville then. Is that right, Chris?
Yes, it was 1974.
1974, Chris says.
Okay. And I have to be careful. I mentioned it to Chris in an email, or to you in an email, I think. Library of Congress says one person being interviewed, and Chris is welcome to jump in with a fact like that now and again, but we can't make her officially part of the interview.
Okay.
But feel free to whisper in his ear or something. All right.
He's done that most of my marriage.
I understand. This.
It's my benefit.
Yes. Okay. So you're back in Gainesville, and I did some homework, and I know you ran for the city commission, but that was not until the '80s. And so what were you doing in Gainesville that decade, pretty much, between the time you returned and,
Yeah,
you
just
know?
trying to keep our head above water financially.
Mhm.
Um, went to work for Florida National Banks, and you're right. I got the bug, so to speak, and went to Santa Fe College as director of financial aid,
Oh,
hired by Alan Robertson when he was president of Santa Fe.
I knew him. He was my economics professor at
Right.
UF.
Yeah,
So,
Alan was a good friend.
yes. So
said,
you were at Santa Fe for, go ahead.
13 years.
Wow.
And
What? Go ahead.
overlapping with that was my interest and desire to be mayor of my hometown. So I decided to run for city commission, which, as you recall, in those days, the mayorship rotated commissioner.
Yes.
It wasn't a direct election like it is now.
Right.
Anyway,
You had to run for commissioner first, right?
that's right. And I was elected 1985.
Besides wanting a lifelong ambition to be mayor of Gainesville, your hometown, were there specific issues that you would have, that you would have emphasized and wanted to see happen during your incumbency?
Well, it was something trying to figure out the best way to balance environmental protection,
Mm-hmm.
with the water quality and water abundance,
Mm-hmm.
and the need for jobs. That platform has not changed a lot, but it was something I very much believed in. Was still to this day get involved with some of the Springs alliances, and Chris and I again raised our sons on the Itchtuckney River.
Oh.
And so between environmental protection and planned growth, that was the two main things. And of course, the constant. I remember my father talking about it, the tension between town and gown, between the good old boys that ran Gainesville and the academics on campus that wanted to tell them the best way to govern. Ray?
Yes, I'm back. Are you back?
I hear you.
Yes, I can hear you.
I see you.
Okay,
So
that's fine. We'll sort that out in the editing. That's fine.
So I was saying that I remember being quite aware of the town and gown tension
Mm-hmm.
between the good old boys of Gainesville and Alachua County, and the academics said they knew how to do it better as far as governance is concerned.
Yes. I'm trying to think who was president of the university then. Was it Marshall Kreiser?
J. Wayne Wrights.
Excuse me?
J. Wayne Wrights.
Oh, that he was back in the in the mid 60s. Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah. My diploma has I have the honor of having the signatures of Leroy Collins and Wayne Wright.
Yeah, I had by the late 60s, after Dr. Wrights left, it was Stephen O'Connell.
Right.
I'm thinking of the 1980s now when you decided to run for commissioner. Was it Marshall Kreiser, head of the university? You recall?
No, well, he was hired right after O'Connell retired. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Marshall served 5 years.
Okay. So you when you were first commissioner, then mayor commissioner of Gainesville, at some point, it looks like you've decided to run for state legislature, for the state house, correct?
That's right.
And again, what was your motivation there? You had specific issues in mind?
Ego.
Well, okay.
No, let me back up just a little bit.
Sure.
John Mills was Speaker of the House,
Yes.
and he was not going. He ran for Congress and was not running for re-election to his
Mhm.
state house seat, so
Mhm.
it was vacant. So Gene Chalmers and I both decided to run for that vacant seat in the legislature, and it was a good campaign. It wasn't anything like you see on the TV nowadays.
Mhm.
It was respectful, but Chris and I worked hard. Our boys worked hard, and because of my kind of comprehensive background in Gainesville and our family, I was able to pull out a victory. Had a runoff with a Republican and defeated him easily.
Mhm.
And then I served 2 terms in the state house.
Mhm. Where a couple of things about serving in the state house. Did you decide not to run for re-election? Were you defeated? Were there term limits?
No,
Why did?
that's
Go
good.
ahead.
The 2 terms, which totaled 4 years,
Right.
I was defeated by a slight margin by Bob Casey, and it was a lot of it had to do with the teapot. What do they call it? The Tea Party and reapportionment.
Okay.
They redrew the lines,
Yeah.
and I couldn't get them to say, "Guys, you're going to hurt me if you give me that much of the villages, because it's all Republican down there."
Yeah.
Well, they all know you're strong, you're doing fine. But I lost by about 2% in the new district,
Yes.
which included much of the village. And the
You're
Tea Party folks thought I was probably too liberal.
But during your time in the legislature, is there any specific legislation that you pushed or were particularly proud of? I know the Miami Herald said you were freshman legislator of the year at one point. So you must have done something.
I think that they've had in mind my freshman initial bill was to ban assault weapons in the sale of retail sale of assault, defined therein, and then it defined AR-15, 16, non-hunting, non-recreational. Because I would tell people, look, I'm an old 82nd Airborne lieutenant. I understand about what weapons of war, and these are not. Who wants to be in the deer woods with somebody who has a rifle with a 30-round clip? Not only is that not fair to the deer, you're going to put your other hunters in jeopardy. Well, the NRA introduced itself, and I got a lot of attention, a lot of publicity because of it, which was not my intent. I thought I had something that made sense and common sense, and didn't realize the degree of passion by the gun owners, that the NRA membership, and also got to meet the most interesting Floridian, Marion Hammer, who's the head of NRA Florida. She's a diminutive lady, tough as nails, never gives in. She's like a rattlesnake. Leave it alone, she'll leave you alone. Mess with it, she'll mess with you. But anyway, I got reelected by a wide margin. Then the next term when I ran is when the Tea Party and reapportionment and such, the NRA folks, confronted my candidacy, and it was unfortunate because I was scheduled to be, not so much unfortunate for me, but Gainesville lost the chairmanship of Education Appropriations, which I was slated to chair under the next speaker.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, of course, the Cross Florida Barge Canal.
Yes.
It's involved in the negotiation and conveyance from the federal government to the state government the land that constituted the Cross Florida Barge Canal. And Marjorie Carr and some of those folks. George Kirkpatrick, our state senator at the time, he wanted nothing to do with that. He had one of his bass fishing in the Rodman Dam, the Rodman Reservoir. We finally got it done, got the land transferred. Then I introduced the bill that named that land the Marjorie Carr, what's the full name of that? Yeah.
The cross the trailway?
Cross Florida Greenway.
Yeah, there you go.
Marjorie Carr Cross. Yeah. I guess those two issues, of course, abortion came up like it always does, one way or the other. And I guess other than that, the Democratic Party platform. I remember too having a very emotional reaction. Well, let me back up. The hemophiliac. There was a lady who took on her own voluntary lobbying because her son had hemophilia. And she came and lobbied us, and particularly me at the time because of my committee assignment, to help her get $1 million to match federal money for the application for hemophiliacs. And we were successful, mainly thanks to this lady's advocacy and her passion. And then Chris and I were invited down to a summer camp for hemophiliac kids in the Ocala forest. And it was a Sunday. And I said, I don't want to go, Chris. We don't have so few Sundays off. He said, no, David, you said you'd come. They supported you. And so we went. And we were so glad I did. We did. Because I was seeing these kids relating to one another about, you have to take those shots and all the other life expectancies of that condition of hemophilia. I kind of welled up with tears when they gave me a plaque. It was just something those children were innocent of, yet they were going to be. It was before the screening for AIDS, transfusions. So they were all going to die sometime soon. But I say all of them, most of them would contract HIV.
Okay. I believe when you would have served in the legislature, was it Lawton Chiles who was governor at the time?
Lawton Chiles, Bob Graham, and then Bob Martinez.
Oh, okay, yeah, after Lawton Chiles. Yeah. I was just curious if you had any interaction with the governors while you were in the legislature.
With Lawton, and Bob Graham and I were classmates here in Florida.
Oh, yeah.
Bob Martinez, I didn't know him until I got in the legislature. He was a very gracious man. Cared a lot about environmental issues and ran a good ship. He didn't get the credit he deserved.
Okay.
And he lost a lot.
Right. He only served one term, as I recall.
Right.
I wanted to ask you, getting back to some of your military experiences, along the way, once you got out of the military, did you join any military organizations at all, like American Legion or any of those?
No.
Okay.
Well,
Go ahead.
I'm a member of the Sons of the American Revolution.
Oh yeah, I read that.
Both sides of the family, both Flagg and Kane. And my father-in-law, Chris's dad, was World War II Navy skipper, minesweeper, sweeper in the Pacific. A little anecdote about when after I got commissioned into the Army, was on active duty, I was home on leave. home in Gainesville. My mother had remarried a man who was a Boston native, and mother from North Carolina would tease him about his Yankee ways. And I told Mom, I said, Bob, you need to ease up on Bob, because after all, you've got a son in the Union Army. She said, oh yeah, that's right. You're in the Union Army, son. I'm not a Confederate, Mom.
That's correct, indeed. I know you've won numerous awards over the years for your work. I had a list here I wanted to mention, but there were just so many. You mentioned the Barge Canal, some of the work that you did there, Habitat for Humanity, Payne's Prairie. You were a founding director?
We started Ed Johnson, who was publisher of The Sun, Charlie LaPrade, who was, the All-American football player, PhD, was president of community college, Carl Lipsius, and Jack Gillian. And I think that's about a nucleus of people who cared about keeping Payne's Prairie as a wildlife preserve. And so we formed Friends of Payne's Prairie. So we gathered there, founded this nonprofit to promote and conserve the Payne's Prairie, and reintroduced the bison and wild horses.
Oh, okay. So you were part of that. Yes, that's great. One major thing I'd like to ask you, and I sort of hinted at it in an email, you with your College of Journalism background, I've since found out so much about your what you call eclectic career, but somehow you got involved in a biotech startup.
Yeah.
Could you talk about that?
I had been lobbying for Shands and UF Health and John Lombardi in Washington and Tallahassee. And that led me to know a lot of influential members of the Florida congressional delegation. A mutual friend learned of a neurologist at the UF working on something called, what was it?
Blood-based.
Blood-based
Brain damage.
Brain damage. I sound like I got it right now.
How about a blood-based biomarker test?
Well, that was the name of the company that we formed.
Yeah.
Banyan Biomarkers. Ron Hayes was the principal neurologist. And basically, it was to measure in blood, like taking a finger prick, and being able to determine if traumatic brain injury was present or not. And so the National Football League got interested. They gave us $500,000 to pursue it. And then I talked to Congressman Bill Young, who at that time was chairman of Defense Appropriations, about banning biomarkers, and he got interested in it. A nonpartisan issue and one that could save lives on the battlefield in particular. The concussive effect of explosives and that damaging to the brain. And we applied, and Bill actually just, the way things really work up there, he just let DOD know you're going to see a line item that I'd like to see taken care of. And that was $3 million for a company at the following latitude and longitude, which was Banyan Biomarkers.
Ah, okay.
And identified as such, so as to keep from attracting attention. Somebody coming along and swiping our $3 million. So at this time, we got FDA approval for the creation of a product that would indeed answer questions about traumatic brain injury diagnostics. right now we're kind of in a holding pattern, talking with a couple of big farmers about utilizing the Banyan platform as a integrated system of their own, like Abbott, Johnson and Johnson. Excuse me. And we would if we can work this out, get royalties for letting them use our technology.
That's wonderful.
And
again, go ahead.
The university, because it was discovered, if you will, on the university time, the university would get 10%. So that's how they enhanced promotion of research in that case. And
that has direct application, I believe, especially since you're working with the DOD, for our troops as far as those who may have gotten traumatic brain injury.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Let me a little sidebar.
Sure.
You're talking about the troops. In the first Iraq War, Chris and I had visited Fort Bragg, and Sergeant Major Love and a Lieutenant Colonel, who was his brigadier, who was his commanding officer, told us about the shortages that they had. They went off the record, but they had no armor plate under the Humvees, for example. So you ran over an IUD, blow up, you had no protection. The equipment was poor, was falling apart. And Chris, and they didn't have basic stuff like soap and toothbrushes, and the troops didn't, or they were in short supply. And so Chris and I went through the Gainesville community, gathering up care packages, if you will, to be sent to and addressed to specific members of the 82nd Airborne who did jump in to Iraq. A lot of people don't know or remember that.
Well, what you have said sort of leads into my next to the last question I usually ask. And your military experience, albeit perhaps brief, 3 years, probably had some experience on your life. How has it affected your views on war and the military in general? How does it inform you who you are today, your own experience? I know you've said part of that about talking about this company, but any other thoughts there?
Well, here we are talking some 50 years later about the military. So obviously I still have it in mind in my own participation. One of our sons was also a Coast Guard personnel, and he got called up right after 9/11 to active duty, got called out of law school. And I would say that I wish that more young men and women would volunteer to serve in the military. Mm-hmm. I think I'm glad to see, frankly, the allowance of women to be in military duty. I think it would be a good thing for a kid coming out of high school to be able to devote 2 years to the military, or even 2 years to basic public service, in exchange for help with the cost of going to college after they'd served their 2 or 3 years of citizenship. Mm-hmm. And we should be very proud of our military and give them the policy making and funding they need to do the job. There's a saying of to achieve peace, prepare for war. And I think if we had the right leadership, we could return to that.
Okay. Well, the last question I always like to ask is, have I missed asking a question, something that you would have liked to talk about, but I failed to ask you?
Oh, let's see. By the way, Ray, how was it you were aware of the Florida Council 100 and the Development Commission?
Well, I'll mention this very briefly because this is your story, but basically I was doing some academic research on that. And when we stop recording, and we can stay on this Zoom for a moment, I'll be happy to tell you more. But again, this is your story, and Library of Congress may not be interested in how I know about that, but we'll talk about that. Okay?
Okay, that's good.
Well, I want to thank you again. Again, I will stop the recording. We can talk for a minute. And we've been talking today to David Flagg of Gainesville, Florida. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.